Well, I guess your specialty that would stand out to all of us, it would be soloing. And there aren't a lot of people who do it, certainly nobody at your level. And so I'm curious now tactically to focus the lens on how you climb differently, whether you're roped up or on a solo.
Yeah, there's definitely a difference in the way I climb with or without a rope, as you would expect. And not just with or without a rope, but, trad climbing versus sport climbing. I mean, I'm willing to take much more risk. I don't mean risk in the risk of falling off and breaking my legs. I mean likelihood of falling, like jumping for holds and smearing your feet on things that may or may not hold. Basically, when you're sport climbing, you need to take quite a bit of risk all the time. You have to jump to things and swing your body and try really tenuous toe hooks and things like that, because otherwise you just can't really sport climb at your limits. But when you're trad climbing or soloing, you should be taking far fewer risks. It's you don't want to be making any chancy moves. You need to think things through and be careful about it. And I think that's actually been one of the challenges for me over the years as a climber, is that I alternate between styles relatively frequently. And it's hard to go from absolute control on an expedition or when you're soloing or something like that to then, total riskiness as a sport climber or a boulder again. Risk isn't necessarily the right term. I need a different term for it, because most people think of risk as they think of an expedition as being really risky, right, when you're climbing big walls in some remote place. But what I mean is that when you're in those situations, you have to climb with a ton of control and a lot of a wide margin of safety. Whereas when you're sport climbing, because it's fundamentally safe, you can take a lot of chance with your movements.
Yeah, maybe is it tolerance or tolerance for falling? I mean, that was something that I struggled with massively. Learning climbing on trad routes and talkies and then coming out to the red, I was completely unwilling to move dynamically, to take a fall. You never want to test gear and all this stuff, all the things that you learn when you're learning how to trad climb. In some people who climb trad often are more than willing to test gear, of course, but I wasn't.
Actually, I want to sort of reframe this a little bit, because we keep talking about sport climbing like it's totally safe. But my in-laws live next to us, and they're in their 60s and they love climbing. They go out all the time. But they're sport climbing on 5.5 to 5.9s in Red Rock, and it basically means that it's low angle walls with big features. And for them, falling is a much more dangerous proposition. One, because they're a little older and more frail, and they probably, who knows how well they belay, but I assume they won't listen to this. We'll see. But no, they're fine. But the main thing is that the wall is low angle and there are more features sticking out, and so for them, falling actually is dangerous. And the thing with climbing is that realistically, there's always some degree of risk, danger. There's always consequences in climbing. The difference is, though, that some disciplines of climbing are predominantly safe, where you can mostly not have to think about those kinds of things. And then other disciplines of climbing are inherently dangerous, think free soloing or certain styles of trad climbing. And so it's no matter what you're doing as a climber, you should be evaluating risk, you should be thinking about it a little bit, but it's just such a bigger part of some disciplines.
And then you mentioned, I think that's a really important distinction. I've cheese grated my way down enough slabs, or I don't want to fall on certain things, even though it's bolted.
Yeah. And I just think it's a little disingenuous for us to be oh, it's bolted, it's totally safe. Because I'm man, I definitely don't want to see my father-in-law whipping on some 5.7 in Red Rock and breaking both of his legs, because it's all just there's too much stuff sticking out of the wall. And so realistically, anybody should always be evaluating case by case, is this safe? Will I be okay?
Absolutely. And kind of along with that, as part of the PSA is, really good communication with your belayer, because there could be a ledge, there could be a boulder, there could be a roof that you don't want to swing under and chop your shins on. And so, yeah, I mean, even though it's bolted, there can still be quite a bit of potential injury there. So that is a good and important distinction. All right, y'all, 30-second break here to shout out today's sponsor, PhysiVantage Nutrition. They make the best of the best when it comes to climbing performance nutrition. I'm sipping on their supercharged collagen this morning, which has been proven to build stronger, healthier tendons. And what does that mean? Well, we can train harder and we can climb longer and recover faster. And who doesn't want to do that? Am I right? Look, hit that link below, give them some love, support the pod, support PhysiVantage, which is such a great company. You get 15% off. You can use code STRUGGLE at checkout at physivantage.com, or if you hit the link below, it'll automatically load for you. Cheers. Was sport climbing, because you started in the gym, you're kind of the first generation of gym climbers, which is not set up typically for crack climbing, although some gyms have like crack machines and that kind of thing. But that's like a sport training style. And then did you let that fall off as you started to focus on, bigger walls and the link ups and in the valley? Or why has sport been kind of this style, or like the overhanging pockets, where that's something that's been a little bit more challenging for you?
Actually, the gym that I grew up in was pretty well rounded. It was it's such an old school gym that it was all hand molded plaster. So there actually were hand carved plaster cracks in the walls. Oh, cool. And I actually learned how to aid climb in the gym as well, because I could basically tie off one end of a top rope and then rope solo on the other end of this top rope, and basically aid climb up these cracks in the gym. So I learned how to place gear in the gym. I learned how to aid climb in the gym. I learned how to crack climb in the gym. My gym, when I grew up, it was called Granite Arch Climbing Center in Sacramento. It's still open. But they had like a dry tooling area in the back, and people would go in and ice climb on like a plywood wall. They would just be like thwacking away with tools. And so there would be plastic holes in the gym that had like notches cut into them so that you could dry tool on them. But so, I was growing up in an era where the climbing gym was really seen as a way to train for climbing. And so I think that from the beginning, I always kind of looked at climbing with a pretty holistic, like all branches, all disciplines of climbing were equally interesting in a way. I mean, and growing up, I cared just as much about mountaineering and summiting things. And like, I was doing a lot of big hikes when I was younger. Because, to me, that was an important part of climbing. And so, I don't know. I mean, I've just always, it's not like I chose one discipline or another. It's like I've always been interested in all of them simultaneously. It's just that not all of them come as easily to me. It's like I'm just not as good at a lot of them.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think, first of all, I wish gyms like that were still around. Yeah.
And on the other hand, it's a pretty scrappy facility. It's like it's charming in its way, but you're like, man, modern mega gyms are a lot nicer.
Mentally shifting between those gears. You were saying sometimes that, like, if you've been really focused on one of these big expeditions where it's like no fall, and then you get off the plane and you're back home at Vegas and you go out to Red Rock, how do you kind of get back into a different style?
Well, I don't really have a good trick for just switching styles, and I think that's a challenge. I think that's sort of a problem for me. For me, I think it just naturally comes as you start spending more time doing whatever discipline. Like if I've been training indoors a bunch or like moonboarding a bunch, I'll just naturally get a little jumpier and more dynamic because that's what's required to climb that style. And so I think I generally just spend some time doing whatever the thing is and sort of ease back into it. But actually, and now that you mention it, I'm like, maybe I should have a better way to switch back and forth. Actually, it's pretty easy for me to switch back into soloing mode. Like it's easy for me to climb with a lot of control and sort of certainty in my movements. That kind of comes naturally. It's much harder for me to ease back into the like fast climbing, jumping for holds and like not caring so much. Just because that's like not my go-to.
Yeah, your default setting is very controlled, very static. 3 points of contact, that kind of thing, and then
exactly. Yeah. My default is the leader must not fall. I'm like a 1960s trad climber. Yeah.